I have to do everything. I have to know everything because if I only have myself to depend on.
Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories.
So here's my story. And please, 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 no COVID judging. No COVID, no quarantine shaming. I would
You
appreciate
think I'm going to pass up an opportunity to shame you about something?
I was talking to
well, you know what? Not shame, but like, can I mock? Like, if I don't go all the way to shame, can I mock?
You can certainly mock. And I was talking to our larger audience because, we're skyrocketing in Singapore, I think it is, or wherever we are. But anyway, so I was up in New York for a long-awaited closing on a large transaction, and we stayed socially distanced and masked up and all this stuff, except when I went to dinner with my client. And I went to dinner with my client, one other member of his management team, but my client who owns the company had his son and his son's girlfriend join us because they live in New York. Mm-hmm. So we were at the table, and his son, who is about 24, 25 years old, had mentioned, he said, hey, I got a great deal on some Peloton stock, and I put a call on it. And so the father and the other guy that was there was like, well, what'd you buy it at? What's the call at? What's it, and started asking him, and like, oh, you better hang on to the stock. You better do this. And that was a good call. What else are you looking at? And they started talking about all of this. And he's 23, 24, however old he is. Mm-hmm. And I flashed back to a book that I had read a long time ago called Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah.
And for those who aren't familiar with it, and I can tell that you are, but for those who aren't familiar with it, the subtitle is something along the line of what rich, it says fathers, but really what rich people teach their kids about money that poor people don't.
So yeah, I have not read the book. I am familiar with it, but it's on that list of ones. I'm like, oh yes, I know that book. But let me be clear, haven't read it yet. But
yes, but it's interesting, and this struck me as a case in point because I know that the son had grown up with some money to quote unquote play with, and he grew up with advisors who would teach him how to do things, much to his credit, and he took to it, and he was very earnest about it. He wasn't saying it in a bragging fashion. He was really just making conversation because that's within the confines of his normal. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking that, I had taken my sons to meet with my financial advisor a number of times to acquaint them with stocks and all that, but not to the level that this person did.
Right.
And I know that I was never taken. That's not how I grew up. That's not how my father thought. And I was thinking about this, not just in the context, obviously, of parent to child, but I was thinking about this in the context of how you bring up your management team. And I was reminded of your story about having people parse up the bonuses, at the retreat, just as an exercise. And even going beyond that, which I think is valuable, I see this in a division between startups run by people who are used to being around successful business people, and startups literally out of a garage by people who, they have their friend whose sister-in-law might have been a bookkeeper like 100 years ago and will do this. And somebody who has, no, I have an account. I know how to do this. And I think there's a real difference in terms of education, in terms of culture, in terms of approach between, the haves and have-nots and how they bring along their generation. So I thought it was interesting and encapsulated in that conversation.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I certainly echo everything you're saying from a parenting perspective. I mean, I very much did not grow up with any of those conversations at my house. And my kids, my son is 18, and literally, it's so funny you're bringing this up because literally maybe a week or two ago, he comes upstairs and is all proud because apparently he this isn't the part he was like super proud of, but the fact that this was like a no-brainer, that it occurred to him, they thought it was just kind of fascinating. He started a Robinhood account, which is sort of like E-Trade, but it's different. I don't know. I haven't even looked it up yet.
That's a platform?
It's a platform. Yeah, but I haven't looked at it yet. So this is literally just a few days ago. And he started this account and he's been playing around with this. I guess what's nice about it is you can play around with like the tiniest bit of money. You don't need, like, you can use like $20. You can like buy something. And he's been like buying and selling stocks apparently, which fascinated me for two reasons. One, Paul and I, my husband, for those of you who don't know my husband, Paul and I have like 401ks and whatnot, but even we don't buy and sell. I don't know. I even make this like sort of body language, like, hey, kind of like I'm buying and
like
selling.
The Monopoly man, buying and sell stocks.
Buying and selling stocks. Like I don't know what I'm doing, and we don't know. Like even if I were to try and teach him about how that works, like I know some very basic stuff, but I'm not savvy in it. And what's so interesting to me is, just even being in a slightly different world, he has a different perspective, but how much even more of a perspective he would have if we had, like you're talking about, been talking about that around the dinner table from childhood. And I certainly see that happening in clients and businesses, because I think what's really tricky is because you just literally don't know. So I guess it's the birthplace of the you don't know what you don't know kind of thing, because it doesn't even occur to you. And what's funny is last time I popped up to New York, I ended up missing my train and spent the night in the train station, whatever, like waiting for the 4:50 train.
Delightful.
Yeah. And the last time I told that story to someone, as I was telling the story, I almost got distracted trying to tell the story, because for the first time ever, and literally, and does wrap back to my point, like it never occurred to me, this was only like 6 or 7 years ago, I could have walked out across the street, gotten a hotel room, slept a nice night, taken the 8 or 9 train home. Like there were other options besides make do with what you have right in front of you, be scrappy, resourceful, figure, but the difference, it's not like those things occurred to me and I had some mindset of like, oh, I'm not good enough. No. It literally never popped into my mind that I had other options. And I think that is we weren't poor when I was a kid, but we definitely didn't have anything extra lying around most of the time. And so, I love that it made me scrappy, resourceful, and that I can make things out of nothing, and whether it's crafts or dinner or whatever, that's great. But it is interesting the places in which and I see this with clients sometimes, where they don't even know the questions to ask, or they don't even know to kind of look around for other resources. Whereas somebody else might say, oh, I could get capital. That's the big shift I see, that the clients who naturally see a gap in where they are and what they want to build or create, and try to imagine how to bootstrap it or stitch together a mosaic of tiny pieces of resources to build the bridge to where they want. And the people who instantly say, oh, I just need to get someone to invest in, some capital. And I know people who know people. And it's a very different, it's two things. Obviously, one huge component here is just access to resources, which is a whole other topic that I feel really strongly about. But even just if we stick at the mindset piece of it, of just even occurring to you to access resources that you may or may not have access to, but I don't know, getting a little off track here.
But I think that's true. I think that the first mindset is, I have to do everything. I have to know everything, because if I only have myself to depend on. Mm-hmm. And I see that in a lot of startups. And, it's interesting, when years ago, I had my own practice, but I was probably in my, whatever it was, mid-30s. And I realized that I knew a pretty good collection of really successful people. And I did legal work for them, but I didn't know them outside of just the transactional relationship. Can you do this? Can you do that? And et cetera. So I decided to make appointments with 10 of them. And the goal was to go, and the thought behind it was to go into their office and just ask them to tell me what they wish they had known when they were younger, what they believe were the greatest factors in their success, what they wish they had known when they were my age. And I wasn't 22 right out of college. I was 35, but still, they knew me as a lawyer. But, outside of knowing my profession, I didn't know half of what they knew about really being successful and entrepreneurial. And I had to, I really hesitated over that because there's this concern that, well, if I go to them and I admit as their lawyer that I don't know something about business, then they're going to take their business elsewhere because obviously I'm stupid. Obviously. So I had, and that is a mindset, geez, I have to know everything, so I can't ask. So that's one mindset. I went in and I'm happy to report that not one of the 10 of them threw me out of their office for being stupid. An astonishing number of them said, cited having a mentor, even continuing to their age, having people, sometimes it's a peer group, but, and not formal like Vistage, although some probably did, but just a peer or a mentor and other people they can go to bounce ideas off of, and almost to a person. I think, I don't like the universal, so I won't say every one of them because I don't recall exactly, but I think just about every one of them said that they never regretted paying for quality advice. And they would even beg, borrow, and steal to try and find a quality person, even spend 20 minutes if that person had free time to just get advice or to ask for coffee or to do something, but to surround themselves with people right from the jump who were really good in their fields.
Yeah.
And it struck me as really interesting because there's this legend of the self-made person, and I found that was universally untrue in all of their cases. As much as they wanted to build up their own legend, when it got down to questioning and asking them and telling their story, they all had somebody or a collection of people.
Always. There's a fantastic article that I actually have a link to on my website that I'll make sure Christy has to put in the show notes. And it's called something like that, the myth of the self-reliant CEO or something like that. And it actually does some research on who and how people of different stage companies have people to rely on. And it's a small, not officially scientific study. It's just someone doing some surveys and whatnot. But in that data set, it was the opposite of what I think some people might think is true, is like the more people grew their business, the more reliant they were on other people and mentors and whatnot. And what I like about where we've headed with this, because when you first started, it was weighing on me a tiny bit of this thing that feels like there's no good answer to, because some of what we were originally talking about, the moral of the story is like, well, if you're born into a family or a company that already can give you this great head start, yay you.
Yes. The moral of the story is, so be born rich.
Right. It's it's all these things that you can't control. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur who doesn't know what you don't know what you don't know. Like, you can't be like, get on that, will you? But what we are talking about is regardless of where you're born into or where your company is, or that you can always be seeking out people who you can learn from. I mean, you mentioned Vistage. I joined a Vistage trusted advisor group that at the time, for where my business was, not only was the monthly fee, which I think at the time was like $375 a month for the trusted advisor program. There were many months, if I recall, that I wasn't even billing that much. It was very, very early on, but I did it because I wanted to be around people who had successful consultancy companies and hear what they were talking about. And there were a number of months where I would be jotting. I remember the first time there was this long conversation about M&A, and I had no idea what M&A meant. And in fact, I wasn't even sure whether it was letters or whether it was just a word that I had never heard,
Right. A French word.
A French word. Yeah, it was like M&A. It's it's got the E with a slash at the end. I don't know. And I jotted it down, and, I wasn't so rude as to Google it right there in the moment, but almost every single time I had things to go look up to be like, what were they talking about? And slowly, I learned from that, and it was really useful. But putting yourself in environments, I think there's a dueling thing. I think sometimes as a leader, there's a seductive want to be like the smartest person in the room, and that can certainly, or feel like you're the smartest person in the room, or want to be the smartest person in the room. But it is rarely, there's a quote about that. Like if you're always the smartest person in the room, it's the wrong room.
Yeah.
I think a constant drive to not be the smartest person in the room is both good for your own personal development, but I think it's a great leadership skill as well. Like if you have a leadership team or, departments of people who are smarter than you, that's usually a good thing.
Yeah, it is a good thing, and it's one of the things that I tell my sons all the time, to the point where they roll their eyes. I know, which is, you're the average of the 5 people you hang out with most.
Mm-hmm.
So exactly who are you hanging out with? And is that where you want to set your bar? So I think about that in a business context, and not in terms of hanging out like your employees, but the people you surround yourself with. And so when I look at the disaster that is 2020 as a year, but looking forward as we are now to 2021, in addition to considering, well, okay, what are the financial goals, that you always think about, as you get into a new year, if you're running a business, but also who do I want to spend more time with, especially as the quarantine opens up. And there are just a number of people that I miss having conversations with that aren't agenda driven.
Right. Yeah.
That I walk away feeling energized from, or just because it doesn't even have to be a field that's like mine or giving me advice, but just listening to their passion and their engagement and their ideas and what really, gets their engine going.
Right. Because that's a really important point, because I think that the way we were talking about it was thus far might sound like we're saying, surround yourself with people who are smarter than you or more successful by standard measures or whatever. And that's not even necessarily, that certainly can't hurt, but I think it's also very much a factor of, you may have somebody who has failed multiple times in businesses or, shut them down. That's not the measure by which I use. It's when I hang up the phone or get back in my car or whatever the thing is, do I feel like some tank I have has been filled up by being around that person? And whether it's like creative juices or knowledge or inspiration, or, there's one person that I always, it sounds really funny, but I actually really appreciate this one person I talk to sometimes, because it's almost like the opposite of inspiration. Like, I'll be like, oh, well, and they're like, oh, right. Cause you're like, they could sort of knock me down off my overthinky, self-aware kind of like, and then there's this and then this, but then I'm like, when they're like, they have this sort of like get over yourself vibe, which I find really useful sometimes, because it knocks all this extraneous clutter off my thought processes that make sense. And that if I just rattled them off to most people, they'd be like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But this person's vibe kind of, shakes that tree a little bit for me. And sometimes I really need that. And that's a value. So it's not even that they have knowledge I need to pick their brain for. It's
well, I certainly, certainly in my world, I have a sister for the get over yourself vibe. She's, and because, in college she majored in judgmental psychology. So I think she's really good at that. But one of the things that I look at for business is the limitation of, well, I'd like to talk to this consultant, but she deals with much larger businesses. She's not for my type of business, or she's out of my league in a business type way, or that I don't think that I'm worth his time or something like that. And I think it's those self-limiting thoughts that perpetuate almost that rich dad, poor dad thing, that I don't get or deserve to have access to that kind of cognitive firepower or advice.
No, you are absolute. There is a do I have a seat at the, should I have a seat at this table kind of vibe to it? Like, and I love that you brought that up, because in the same way that it didn't occur to me to walk across the street and get a hotel room, it didn't occur to me even as a grown adult to open up a E-Trade account or Robinhood account or something, like just to play around with $20 or whatever, just to like, there is a certain part of it's funny how it's funny how many things linger from a way you grew up that you don't even realize are background kind of soundtracks playing in the background. But if I were to have to walk into not that the stock market works this way, but if it was that there was like a store you had to walk in and say, I'd like to buy, I'd like to play with stocks. If that was the way it had to work, if I'm completely honest, I would feel like they might be like, excuse me, like you're not grown up enough or something, not grown up enough, but like, I don't think this is for you, little lady. And not because I'm a woman, just because it's something that didn't feel like it was for us.
Right. My people don't do that.
My people don't do that. They'd be like, are you one of those people? Yeah, it just feels it feels so foreign to me that I would have to summon something. And so, maybe that's it. It's when things feel foreign or like for other people, maybe part of it is just finding ways to create a familiarity or an at-homeness in it, finding inroads or ways that it doesn't feel like this, I don't know, way far out there kind of. I had that. It's funny now. This feels like a Jody confessional kind of thing. But my car, the last time we bought a car, because my husband and I, thus far, when we have purchased vehicles or houses or whatnot, we've always done it jointly. And the last time I bought my car, I just happened to be there by myself, and there was no reason. I can't qualify for a car loan on my own. So I bought the car in my own name. And the whole time there was this tiny part of me who was going to like, wait, the manager was going to walk out and be like, sorry, you can't buy a car by yourself. And if you asked me prior to that day, do you believe that, you're not capable or whatever, I don't even know what word would go in that slot. Like, is there any reason you couldn't go buy your own car? I would have vehemently pounded the table with my answer of course not. Like, that is absurd. Like, I don't need my husband to buy a car. I have plenty of income to do that and a good credit rating and all those things. That's my brain side of it. But sitting there in the moment, if I'm honest, there was this part of me who was like, that's not, you can't do this.
Well, I think that's the point. I think intellectually, if you ask anybody or not anybody, but most people in business, regardless of background, they would say, absolutely, I do want the highest and best advice. I do want to be able to do this. I do want to be able to do all of the options that are in front of me. But it's the emotional and the upbringing that often holds people back, because it was never in the frame of reference. And so if I could teach one thing to my kids if they go into business or to startups that I work with, it's that, each year, instead of just concentrating on the money, because the money can eventually take care of itself, concentrate on the people you want to be with, the advice you want to get, the people who can break you out of your mindset that you've brought to the table.
Yeah, people who bring enough mindset that you don't have the luxury of caving to the emotions of a thing.
Exactly.
Like I started that process of buying the car, and had I walked in there that day, like, I'm going to go buy this car, I don't know if my emotions would have gotten the better of me. I don't think so. I hope not, but I have no idea. But because the process was already started, at that point, it would have been far more emotionally daunting to be like, I'm sorry. I don't know what voice that is, but I would have never backed out at that point, even though I was having that sort of like discomfort. So that's the other piece to it. I think the value of surrounding yourself with people who have that different perspective and the different, whether it's because they grew up differently or because they've been in business longer, whatever it is, surrounding yourself with people who don't get hung up or daunted by certain things can put you in a position where it's almost more of an obstacle to cave to those emotions. Because
I think
like
you have to go from can I to of course.
Right. I love that.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
Your stories.
You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.